keep getting questions of, how was I supposed to prepare for what they're calling the isolation economy? And I think messaging is one piece of really what needs to happen for businesses of any size, even if you're a small mom and pop shop, even if you're a Fortune 500 company, whereas you need a kind of crisis preparedness plan. Messaging is part of that, but it is something that you cannot take your finger off the pulse of what's happening in the real world. That's where we see things going wrong right now, in terms of, like Kyle was saying, with the clubs that are leaving their advertising on right now, they're wasting dollars. You can't even really go. But having that plan of how are you going to shift, your workforce into a remote workforce? How can you adapt to disasters and not to make yourself seem paranoid, but to really understand what could happen and how you can adapt to it.
Yeah, it's actually it's interesting. We had a fire drill here the other day, and I live in an apartment complex, and the fire alarm went off, and you could feel the entire building just go wait, what do I do now? And it's one of those things where you practice it so much when you're in elementary school and middle school. You have a fire plan, you go outside, you wait out there, the all clear gets sounded, you come back inside. No one knew what to do because no one had a plan. And what ended up happening was people slowly filtered out, and then the alarm stopped, and one person went in, tried the door, and went upstairs, and then everyone else was like, oh, okay, I guess it's good to go now. I guess it's okay to follow the leader in that direction. And it's interesting because it makes you think so few people have a plan for something like this, and you're all just kind of looking around and saying okay, well, what's the market going to do? What are other people going to do? Without really realizing that wait, if no one has a plan at a certain level, you're responsible for yourself, and you need to make that sort of determination.
I had somebody ask me the other day, when we put out asking people for questions on social media, and they say, what do you think about the ethical approach to advertising in such a crazy time?
Yeah.
And that's something that, even without the crazy time, there is definitely a role of consideration for ethics in marketing. But beyond that, it's for example, our higher education students right now, if we're able to go ahead and get that one student, maybe in our doctor program, who ends up saving lives, that's worth it. There is a role for it. It's the world of marketing, is important to consider of how can you make these businesses survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something that, Google has clearly already recognized this. I know, Carly, we were chatting just before we started recording on here as far as Google pushing a large sum of money in for small and mid-sized businesses. If you're already a Google advertiser, you might actually have funds coming into your account today to kind of reinforce that. And the truth behind this is, a lot of the industries that aren't an everyday necessity, if you're talking about someone who's a roofer or something like that, even if you're in quarantine, if your house is leaking, or if a storm comes or something, you're still going to need to have that fixed. It's still important that people realize that these services are out there and that small businesses can still advertise on Google, especially since there is so much noise going around right now. There's been huge changes in even the SERPs themselves and how they're being structured in really positive ways, talking about Corona, talking about getting information out there. But people are still living, right? We're still going about our day-to-day lives while this is happening, and that normality needs to continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, to your point, Kyle, roofers and contractors, things like that, they still have work to do.
Yeah.
If your window breaks or your roof is still leaking, we've had, a couple of roofing clients who want to minimize dollar spends right now. And that's okay. We understand that you need to pull back a little bit, but you can't pause because people will still need these services.
Yeah.
That's the scary thing is, your instinct as a small business right now is to just pause. You freeze up, you're scared, you pause. But think about it. Life goes on. Things are still happening. Maybe you don't need the luxury of a new roof if you were just thinking about doing it as an aesthetic. But if you still need a new roof, you still need a new roof. That's not going to change. If you still need new windows, if your window's broken or my back slider the other day stopped working, life goes on. So it's important for us as an agency to speak to our advertisers in that way and let them know hey, we understand you're scared. Everyone's scared right now. There's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of uncertainty. But to put it into perspective for you, you're still going to have clients that need you, and they need to be heard right now. They need to understand that you are here for them as much as they're here for you, and vice versa. So it's, again, it goes back to that messaging.
There was a really helpful CXL study that has come out recently about different pandemic disasters and similar disasters that have affected the kind of world of business, and the kind of the net of that is essentially those who did not hold the purse close to the chest and who invested in themselves and getting their message out in the market have been the companies that have grown during these time frames. Whether it's the .com crash, whether it's the 2008 financial crisis, or whether it's during the SARS-MERS breakout. That being said, like Carly, it is uncertainty right now. We cannot say we exactly can use those, studies from the past, but what we can say is this is not the time to be conservative. It is the time to take the bold approach to pivot and make sure that you are speaking to people who are, everyone's afraid. Everyone is afraid right now. And the way that you can, make sure that you have a place in doing that is by being proactive. And I will say, even beyond advertising and beyond marketing, is small business owners and medium business owners should also make sure that their voices are being held and being heard by local policy leaders and government. I think that's more important than ever, because this is the time that, their voice matters as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are that one company, say Connecticut, for example, if you are that one, I'm going to use roofers because we're already talking about roofers, but if you are that one roofer that has that bold messaging out there, you're going to be the one who gets the jobs and whose business starts to grow. Whereas those who were afraid and pulled back entirely, you're not going to keep getting the jobs. The ones who put themselves out there are. So yes, it's scary. And yes, we understand there may be a need to pull back or scale back a little bit, but you can't pause this entirely. Life is still going on, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
Honestly, they're even, I don't want to sound like opportunistic off of some of this, but recognizing how search interests are changing and how, again, people aren't pivoting in terms of the words they're using, but also people aren't pivoting as far as like the keywords that they're physically targeting or going after. It makes you wonder a lot about like you get your DoorDash, your Grubhub, your Postmates, like these big delivery services right now that we touched on briefly. But a lot of these other companies themselves are kind of reluctant to be on those because of the service charges that get added on top of it. Food doesn't get delivered like, the way that they would like prepared in the restaurant. So they're doing things like curbside delivery. The thing is, to get that message out there, they're just posting on their Facebook pages or on like Twitter feeds and things. It's weird. Like Facebook is like more up to date than someone's website now. But it almost makes you wonder, like, why don't some of these individual companies start going after keywords that are, by the way, spiking in terms of like search trends of like curbside delivery or local restaurants that do curbside delivery near me, bidding on those terms and saying like, yes, we do it. Click here for a full menu. All that you have to do right now is pick up the phone and call us. And I know everyone likes to like, hey, Postmates, I can place the order directly on my phone, click a few buttons and I'm done. But realistically speaking, you can just pick up the phone and call a restaurant, even give some of I actually just ordered pizza the other day from a local place and they asked for my credit card information or debit over the phone, which I was like a little taken aback by. And then I was like, oh yeah, it's because you don't want me physically like coming in and running stuff. And it was a fine, like it was a great transaction. But I had to go through like a third party site that was trying to aggregate all the local businesses that were providing these sort of services. It's like, it's weird right now that if you want to support a local business and it's going out of your way as a customer, not just in terms of like placing the order, but in terms of even figuring out who's open and who's not. It goes back to this Google My Business discussion of like making sure you're actually communicating with your customers. That's not just the sign out there on the door. It's just staying on top of this and being proactive and potentially going after new keywords or changing the way that you're literally advertising yourself.
Right.
I wonder if that's because you mentioned that people are more likely to update their Facebook right now than they are to their own website. And I think it's because everyone has this mindset, and I don't mean to say everyone, but a lot of people have this mindset that this is short term. The president yesterday just announced that we're essentially in quarantine until April 30th. That's a whole month from now. And we know that very well can change at any moment. So we can't really have that short-term mindset. It's easier on our minds to have a short-term mindset because it's less scary, but I think the short-term mindset is like, oh, I'll do a quick post on Facebook, but we need to think long-term. We need to be updating our websites and our Google pages and changing our messaging for the long-term, short-term, if that makes sense, because it's not going to be over in a week or even 2 weeks. It's longer than that. And we need to have that thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the long-term ramifications of this. Like, let's say, it's under control, everything's taken care of. We recognize that this is going to have a larger impact, especially if you're looking at some of like the economics of like China and places like that, where a lot of the workforce is gone. And then here, where we're at the highest levels of like, unemployment in a long, long time. What does this mean as far as the, future beyond quarantine of advertising, of messaging, of even like job markets and where people are going to be looking? Like, how's all this shifting?
I don't think that this is temporary. I think that a lot of the changes that we're seeing are forcing our economy to change for good. For example, Carly, I remember you were telling me an example the other day about a business owner that who just has not transitioned ever to the digital world, never had a website.
My mother-in-law.
Right. So I think that's a really good example of we're going to be forced to see the digital space be deeply embedded in our economy, more so than it ever has.
Yeah.
Going to be expected. I think right now everything is at our fingertips. We're able to get groceries delivered, which we could before, but now everything's expected. Everything's expected to be on an app or quick or instant or digital or a Zoom meeting. If we're living in this lifestyle for the next 1, 2, 3 months, however long it is, coming out of it, people are going to be used to it and they're going to expect it. So if you are that mom and pop shop who temporarily is offering curbside pickup or scheduling appointments online because you used to not, but yet you're forced to now, when life resumes as normal, your customers are going to expect that. So it's not a temporary thing. This is a long-term change, and it's kind of that kick in the butt that we all needed, and some of these smaller mom and pop shops needed to get up with the times and adapt to technology.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting, like thinking about this evolutionarily, right? Like, we went through a time period where, Amazons of the world and other like big players could come out and you could rise to the top by innovating, by making things that are super user friendly, fun to use, or mobile first, or all these things that like Google and everyone else has been telling us to do. And the companies that got it right did really well and rose to the top. The thing is, there was still space for the 90% of other websites that are out there that are still built on a 1990 version of HTML, right? Like we've all seen these, we've all experienced them. You go online and you're like, oh, okay, they haven't updated it, but it's not really that big of a deal. Carly, kind of to your point now, this expectation of this is what it's like in the digital landscape. It's almost like this is the big catalyst event that comes down, and it's going to wipe out everyone who's in the bottom 50% who has the worst functioning ecosystem, because people physically can't access you.
Yeah.
Right. Or they don't want to, because they're like, I could go over here and it's so much better. It's just so much more exasperated now because we are in a time of crisis. It's the same exact thing that you see in nature, right? There's going to be differentiators between like top performers and low performers. Then an event happens and, half of them end up getting wiped out. And it's a sad truth. Now, the advantage of this that we have over, evolution or something is we can adjust. We can go in there and make the big change to your site or to your presence, or like make sure that you have all of your social listings claimed. It's all feasible steps. It just might be more of a investment than, I think earlier we were talking about like fear of investing in advertising. I think a lot of that goes back to like fear of reinvesting in your company during this time. And this is the time that you need to reinvest, even if you feel like everything is secure, because now everyone around you is going to be making these same sorts of changes.
Yeah, and I think we focus a lot on the business to consumer relationship, but also the business to employee relationship. I think right now we are literally forced to have A/B tests that we've never really considered before. So first thing is are more companies are going to be remote? Are we going to see the commercial real estate industry impacted because companies found out that pivoting to a remote workforce is actually less expensive? Are we going to see events, things like conferences, with companies just not having to go to them right now, is that a best use of their money? Is it impacting them? Or is it something that they did just because they have done it in the past? Or even things like employee travel. Having your employees travel all over creation, is that a good investment? It's a very, very expensive thing to do, but do you actually need to? Or can you actually do things over Zoom conference, what have you? So I think that the actual, structure of how a company operates, even within itself, is going to be impacted too.
Yeah, I think we're going to see efficiencies across the board with how companies operate. We always, that meme that goes around that everyone sees, another meeting that could have been an email, or this is another fly across the country that could have been a Zoom conference. There's going to be so many efficiencies. And again, I keep saying this is the kick in the butt that we needed. A little bit of a silver lining in all of this is we're kind of forcing change upon those people who are afraid of it. Yeah. Now you don't have a choice. And in this downtime, Kyle was talking about, investing in your company. There's a time to do that right now. If you do have downtime and you can make those changes, update your Google My Business profiles, maybe set up appointments online if you didn't have that before. There's tons of apps that do that, but there's things that you can do as a small business owner right now to prepare for the end of this when you do reopen again. If you're a hair salon, just download an app, set it up, email it out to all your clients, let them know, hey, now we're booking appointments online. You can book your appointment now. Because there's probably no one in the salon answering the phone to book appointments for May 1st.
Right.
You have it on an app, and so there's a good time to do that right now.
It's interesting, and something that we need to acknowledge is we are talking from a privileged position. Obviously, we're all using Zoom right now. We're able to communicate freely. The benefit of our agency specifically was we were set up for this. I'm currently located in North Carolina and talking to my colleagues who are up in Connecticut. So it makes it a lot easier for us. We recognize that there's a lot of people who are out there who don't have these same sort of digitally transferable skills. They might be computer illiterate, they might have been born in this culture, but their day job was something that was a lot more manual or physically based. And a lot of the questions that I've been getting in are, okay, like, how did you get your start doing stuff like that? Is this something that I could learn? Because in a lot of ways, our positions and our jobs are a lot more future proof, at least the way that the economy and things seem to be going. So do either of you have suggestions for how you got your start and some of the resources that are out there that you most like teach yourself from or go get education elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that like both Kyle and I have gotten our start with SEO. And what's interesting about kind of what we do in the advertising search space is that everything that you need to learn is available for free to learn online. Every single thing that you need to learn. However, there's so much misinformation and outdated information that the biggest thing is knowing where to access that information in a reputable way, and also kind of be able to put those skills into practice. So first and foremost, the podcast by industry leaders is how I learned very, very quickly on. I could even think of John Mueller from Google and his Google Hangouts that he does, just learning from industry experts. I could tell you people in this industry do not hold information close to the chest because we're all trying to keep up with the curve of Google. And it's something that if you look for those resources, or even, I've been doing a lot of speeches at local colleges, and I've been getting requests from a variety of different students who say, can you just point me to one resource? I will learn it. The people that want to get into this field are hungry for it. And it's just about, understanding where to find those resources and being able to contact people in the space to get there.
And I think it's drive. I launched my own e-commerce website about 5 years ago, and I Googled my way through the entire thing with the help of some friends who had done it too. So rely on friends, people who you've seen be successful at this, but you have to have the drive. This is not something that someone's going to do for you. If you have the luxury of hiring a marketing agency, that's great, hire a marketing agency, but a lot of people don't. And you have to have the drive. The resources are out there, but if you're not going to help yourself, it's not going to happen for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that we can do when we post this is also maybe link to a few of these other resources that we have that we found useful. I know Moz has a really good like multi-page, like this is an introduction to SEO, the 101 sort of basic stuff that you should be looking for. Because Jess, I mean, absolutely to your point, there's a lot of information out there and you can Google everything, but you can also very quickly, you know, if you ever find yourself putting white text on a white background, like you're doing something very wrong, but you know, you're thinking interestingly, at least I can say that.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it stems into the higher education consideration as well, which is like, hey, I could take online classes from MIT and they have a lot of repositories online for free. Why do I even need to go to college? Why do I even need to like, you know, get a degree from a very specific place? Now, the MIT one is perhaps a bad example because obviously they're a reputable area to learn from, but there still is something to be gained going to a specific source of learning and source of knowledge and saying like, yes, I got my education from here. As far as higher education and kind of the silver lining there, because the people who are completely self-taught, who never kind of go out of their way to learn from someone else, and especially someone else who's willing to actually like comment on the work that you're doing and say, this is good, this is not good, it's invaluable and it's something that can't really be dismissed. Can it be shifted over to digitally and more digital formats and having more like live classroom environments? Sure, absolutely, it can be. But as far as like some fields of education, I'm still very in favor of going to actual higher eds. I apologize for the tangent. Sorry.
Oh no, no. I mean that I agree with you. I will tell you that the most valuable thing I got out of my college education was the connections I made. Because I literally got a job, one of my first jobs from my mentor in college, and it's those kind of personal connections that you can make, which I do think that in this world that we're in now, and for somebody that might be like in the service industry that's looking to pivot, you can still make those connections online. You can, it's more difficult, but like I would say even the students reaching out to me now, I think they're brilliant. I wish I had the confidence to do that when I was in college, because I can tell you I was just a shy little thing then. But I can tell you that I'm so impressed by the kind of drive that they have to reach out to people, to ask questions. I think that is going to be a big differentiator for the generation coming into this career, or for people that were in the service industry and looking to pivot. Don't be afraid to be bold and say, I really want to get into this field. I'd rather hire somebody with less experience and more drive than the inverse.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I would say also during this kind of new age, like get your face out there specifically, like sending an email, sending a LinkedIn message. That's great as a first touch. There is something different about like, if you reach out to me and you're like, hey, let's talk about this topic. Like, let's have a Zoom meeting about it. Like, yes, I'm going to be taken aback because I'm from a time period where this wasn't necessarily a thing. I'm making myself sound old now. But I honestly and truly do think that this is going to be the new norm, just because it's so hard to get emotion and empathy, even through a phone call, definitely through an email or a Slack message. I can't tell you the amount of like things that shouldn't have been arguments that ended up being arguments because it was on Slack. Like there's a reason why we have even shifted a lot of our conversations to being Zoom specific, even if it's only going to be a 5-minute conversations, or using the Slack call feature. A lot of these platforms do have the ability to enter into FaceTime, which absolutely like use that, even if you're talking to a new potential like, hey, I want to work for you, I want to work with you sort of thing. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's worth it. Do it.
Right. Well, it's like emulating what you're doing in real life right now. I had dinner with my my sister and Chris's best friend last night on our phones. Because we need human interaction right now. The same thing should be happening in work, and if you're doing it in real life, you should be emulating it in work as well.
See, things like that I would only support if there's something that you can just hide your face. I feel like I would just be watching you chew the entire time. Maybe that's a me thing. That's probably a me thing, realistically.
I didn't think about that till right now. Were they watching me chew? I don't know. Hopefully not. They probably were. Thank you, Kyle.
Oh my goodness. But what's actually very interesting though? So 99% of the ads I get on my Facebook right now are for online dating services. And so they have like these, like, it's like speed dating, but for video chat. And so it's like, People like cycle through this, and it's like that. Think about how this has impacted that industry. You know what I mean? Like that's insane.
Yeah, absolutely. The kind of flip side to this beyond the industries that are, taking a hit as far as like anything involving large crowds, entertainment, sports. Honestly, sports. Quick little tangent on this. It makes you wonder things like, Nike, who used to have giant deals with a lot of these athletes and things like that. Like, where's that money going now? Because they're not getting that sort of placement, that sort of exposure. It's going to be interesting to see how these bigger brands start reinvesting that. I personally am thinking that they're going to be throwing it into digital, and we're going to start getting a lot more interesting and innovative ads. It's one of those things where when you think about like programmatic display and some of the ads that you get and the ad placements, these are the ads that you see on places like on BBC, on sports networks, on things like that, like on the side, and a lot more beyond that, but that's enough for now. A lot of them are just kind of static image with some words over the top, right? There is a huge opportunity for really innovative and interesting content to be put into these places and injected. And the only reason why they really haven't is because, well, there's other places that people are investing their money right now. But this is where the attention is today. It's going to be really cool to see it shift. And I feel like that's going to be coming down the pipeline sooner rather than later. A lot more interesting ads that you're going to start getting. But
go ahead, Jess.
No, I don't even think it's necessarily about just reinvesting into digital. It's specific areas in digital that I think need to be considered. I think everybody needs to look at their media mix right now, exactly what percentage of your kind of advertising investment is going to each individual channel. Because yes, it does make sense for us to say, oh, well, let's go ahead and just, push more money into Facebook because that's already working for us. But I think there's an opportunity here to say, where is that white space?
Yeah.
Where are people not necessarily advertising? Just within the last week, we had a client that is not a B2B client invest heavily into LinkedIn and has seen like 600% returns just in that 1 week in a crisis mode. So I think like having your pulse on exactly, where is the right opportunity, that is going to be something that's going to make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. And interestingly, I saw that Audi and Taco Bell, among other brands right now, actually are doing placements on Zoom. So Zoom has virtual backgrounds that you can add. So Audi and Taco Bell have capitalized on that placement, which is very interesting to me.
That is super interesting. That's
actually.
I remember when Snapchat did that initially, and I was like, this is not going to be a big conversion driver. And that's so not true. Like brands like Glossier is a big one that have invested in Snapchat and seen huge returns. So that's innovative thinking. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually a lot of people have talked about this. Carly, this might be exactly what you're mentioning. This is one that I made, not that our creative team made. A much nicer one made by our creative team. But
it's backwards.
Okay. Well, there we go. Obviously, I am in charge of our creative department over here. Not at all. No, you don't want me near anything to do with that.
No.
But yeah, it's other ways for like, how are you going to present yourself, present your image? And I feel like that sort of technology is only going to be getting better and better too, because like it's getting more attention. So people are going to be putting the investment back behind it. Other industries that are kind of doing extremely well during this time of year, we have someone who is, they sell ginger elixirs. So it's these health-based elixirs. Well, they don't use the term health because like there's a lot more that goes into that sort of, naming scheme. But they have things where it's, ginger and garlic and honey, and they try to use all organic or like naturally made from New York State ingredients. And their sales are absolutely through the roof. They are going hard out of the way to be like, hey, we are not health coaches. We're not saying that this is the right thing to do. But there is this mindset behind, oh, this is like the flu, right? It's out there and it's like the flu. Well, how do you prevent yourself from getting the flu? You drink these like tonics or elixir drinks, so you have your morning routine. In connection with this kind of like health shift that America seemed to be having anyway, it becomes a lot more of a discussion on, I lost it. I had it and I lost it. We're supporting them and they're doing really well. And that's what I got to say about that.
They're doing really well, specifically also on Amazon, because they were
Yeah.
classified as an essential product, which is, we also have other clients here that are paused on Amazon because of Amazon's shift.
Yeah.
So this is a really good example of how channel specific, and understanding where your media mix is, and where you're kind of advertising your product. So, for example, this elixir, is doing really well and has the opportunity to sell more than this time frame than rather than less, or even just maintaining.
Yeah. I mean, this is also like, even after this period of like rampant buying pauses, right? Let's say that people are like, oh, okay, I'm going to be pulling back from that while now, like tightening my purse strings. In a few months down the line, when the economy does inevitably end up recovering, hopefully, you have already built, or this brand has already built up that sort of brand awareness, that mindset of like, hey, we were there during a time where you were suffering. You purchased us. Maybe you even enjoyed it at the time too. Like, why not come back to us later? Right. And it's sticking in that brand awareness, brand building mindset that is just extremely, extremely beneficial.
Right. And that's such a good example for the small brands that are out there. You see the big brands doing it right now. I saw Purdue shoot a commercial just from a selfie. You know, the CEO of Purdue was holding his phone like this, and he shot a commercial, and it's doing phenomenal because it's real, and he's hearing you. He's there for his employees. He's there for his consumers. He's just straight up there for you. He's not trying to push anything right now. He just was like, hey, we're here for you and we care about you. And I'm going to shoot this on a selfie because I'm not going to put anyone at risk. And it's just, your consumers and your employees want to be heard right now.
And I feel like there's a huge misconception between like a small business saying like, oh, well, Amazon's bidding on this, so I can't. You know, like, oh, Walmart has money in here, Nike has money on here, so how am I ever going to compete with them? And realistically speaking, from a digital marketing perspective, that's not really the case at all. What I would say that you need to do is define who your target audience actually is. What are the demographic parameters that kind of encapsulate whoever your best audience is, figuring out what channels they're actually on, and then putting, honestly, even just a small investment behind it to try to reach those individuals. The way that the internet's set up today is you can reach a whole bunch of your target demographic for extremely, extremely cheaply. And what it comes down to more is, how much money are you willing to invest in it, as far as what I would call almost like scope creep, or you want to target this group because this is your best performing group. There's definitely groups around it that are still worth targeting, that are still worth marketing to. But if you're a small business, you don't necessarily need to be reaching that kind of broader peripheral audience. You want to hone in on who your best demographic is. Now, if you're newer to the advertising game, you might not know who that is off the bat. Or you might have a gut feel of who it is, of like, oh, I feel like my best customer is this sort of person. It's really easy to set up a initial split test, a initial A/B test, as long as you've defined one or two variables that you want to test for, say like age or gender or things like that, like geographic location, that lets you hone in on and justify and prove out like, yes, I was correct in this context. But you can do these tests extremely cheaply as long as you're advertising on the right channels.
Yeah. And there's also tools online that you can use that will tell you this information in terms of who's on your website, what is their demographic profile. You do not have to have all of the agency resources in the world to be able to access a lot of that information. And while taking that and understanding that, maybe only a certain part of my audience is actually going onto my website, it can give you baseline understanding of, how do you improve your standing from where you're at right now.
Yeah.
And then doing A/B testing to break it down further so that in time you get better and better and better with the results and the targeting.
Yeah. Now, that being said, again, time of crisis, if you're a small to mid-sized business, you probably have other things that you're focusing on. This is the advantage of an agency. You bring them in, you talk with them, we discover who you are and what you're trying to do and why you're trying to do it, and we help you actually format that message, figure who the audience is, set up the test, and kind of run everything for you. Because you don't always have the time or the resources to actually accomplish that yourself.
Yeah. And then even taking that a step further in terms of, what does authenticity mean to you? And what does that mean in times of a crisis where we actually can go ahead and break out these different messaging segments to say, hey, when we're building creative, this is what's going to resonate in the market. And we use both first and third party data to kind of back up, our hypotheses to say, this is what we can do to kind of pierce through the market and find that white space.